Hi, William Ibanez here, creator of Blazing Quantum, and as a patron supporter, I'm helping to bring this episode. Why don't you become a patron supporter as well?
This is the Comics Alternative Interviews, a conversation with Tom Manning. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek, one of the two guys with PhDs talking about comics. And on this interview episode, I have the pleasure of talking with Tom Manning. His book, Runoff, was published late last year by One Piece Books. But before we get to that conversation, I want to let all of you listeners know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. With every other publisher, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price, and every single month you're going to find some incredible specials. Sometimes those specials will be at 45% off cover price, sometimes at 50% off cover, but often the discounts can get quite a bit more impressive than that. And in fact, the February specials are now up on their website, and if you're looking for bundles, which is a great way to get a variety of different comics for a very low price, you'll find a lot of bundles from places where you usually expect them. For instance, from Valiant, from Marvel, from DC, and, one of my favorites, from Vertigo. But in February, you're going to find an additional bundle from the folks at Aftershock. As part of their February specials, you can try all three of the new Aftershock titles for 45% off of the bundle. So you can always count on great discounts from Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com. They'll take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, please send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you. And on the topic of great prices from great companies, let me tell you about our other sponsor for this episode, and that is Just Coffee Co-op. It's a great place to get tea, coffee, and chocolates. All of their coffee is 100% fair trade, shade-grown, and organic certified. What's more, they roast to order. No mass production, everything is roasted in small batches. They've been around since 2001 with a roastery in Madison, Wisconsin. Just Coffee Co-op is worker cooperative owned, which means that the workers are the owners, and they partner with On the Ground to raise money and awareness for sustainable community development in farming regions across the world. So not only can you get great coffee, tea, and chocolates, but you can feel good about consuming them. That's Just Coffee Co-op. Their website is justcoffee.coop, and when you check out, please be sure to use the coupon code COMICS. That's COMICS. That'll give you 10% off of your order, plus shipping is free. It's justcoffee.coop. Go there and you'll find it's a great place to get caffeinated. I had a great time talking with Tom Manning. His latest book, Runoff, came out late last year from One Piece Books, and it is quite a hefty tome. It clocks in at about 450 pages, and it's really jammed-packed. There's a lot going on. You've got a great ensemble cast, and, as you'll hear in our conversation, it's a mashup of a variety of different genres. There's really a lot going on in this book. So, let's go ahead and listen to the interview. I'm pleased to have on the Comics Alternative Tom Manning. His book, Runoff, was published in late November from One Piece. Tom, welcome to the Comics Alternative.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
And I know this is something that you and I have been discussing for a while, but we just couldn't get our schedules to mesh. But now I have you on the show, and I guess a great way to get started is to introduce for our listeners your book, Runoff, what it's all about, the genesis of this project. In other words, give everyone enough to want to go out there and read this thing.
Sure. A tall order, but I'll try to do it in a short amount of time. Basically, at its heart, it's about a small town in Washington State that's actually based on the town I grew up in. Suddenly, after two bodies are found on a freeway that goes over a mountain pass that goes through that town, people can continue to come into this town, but no one can leave. And so you begin to start to tip into this unbalance of townies and outsiders as they begin to populate this area, which is also halfway populated by the Snoqualmie Indian Reservation. So these tensions build between like the town people of Range, their neighboring Indian Reservation, and the people stuck in town with them. And then on top of that, all these strange and paranormal things begin to happen that opens up a question of why is this happening to them? Why is no one coming to help them? And it reaches a sort of a pitch of all these people trapped together along with genres trapped together. So it in a way becomes an homage to the different genres within comic books and entertainment, but also just a lot of commentary in my mind of kind of the social pulls and multiplicity of Americana. And that's Runoff.
And I don't want you to give anything away that would be, approximating a spoiler, but where does the title Runoff come from?
Runoff comes from an event that it's tied to sort of like a snowpack being built up and up and up and up, and as it melts, you get runoff water, and so of course first you get the freeze and then you get the melt, the runoff, and in a way, not to give away, there's of course this build up, and no surprising, there's got to be a release at some point, and that is Runoff.
Okay, and that eventually, as readers will find out, feeds into the storyline to where that becomes a very important component, especially in the very last part of the book.
Yes, this may be too big of a spoiler, but in the end, there's an existential crisis of being part of a food chain that we had no idea we were a part of, and that is kind of a Lovecraftian, the sort of idea of cosmic horror, this idea that the nature and the universe operates in a way that is beyond our comprehension and more horrifying than we could imagine. It's the sort of, I hope at the end, like all the bickering and social bickerings that make up our daily existence, it's this kind of existential shock that everyone goes through when the runoff appears or begin to happen.
Now you mentioned Lovecraft. Are you a particular fan of Lovecraft? Was his work in any way inspiration for Runoff?
I can't say I'm as big of a fan as other people, but I'm a really big fan. I'm a really big fan of Lovecraft, and the new kind of, I liked the feeling that he would kind of take you down where things remain vague, and there's a mood that I really like about Lovecraft. He doesn't button things up as much, and there's just a sort of atmosphere that I really enjoy with Lovecraft's writing. I think he kind of sits a little more modern than Poe, of course, but not as maybe as modern as Stephen King, but he has that doorway, I think, that opened up to American horror. And there's something about the mood of Lovecraft that I like a lot. It's the Lovecraft stories that I like the most are kind of the biggest ones, like Mountains of Madness and Call of Cthulhu. But I feel, and so you'll appreciate this as a man of letters yourself, that that I went and got my master's degree at Yale for design, and in that concentrated on the way I make comics and the way I work as a designer, and decided that I kind of have an affinity toward artists that I call Gothic American surrealists. This is my own term, but I put someone like Lovecraft as very much a practitioner of that.
And that makes sense to me, because one of the things you get with Lovecraft that you really don't get with Poe, and even Stephen King, at least from the King that I know, is this sense of another world, or a better way of putting it, especially regarding Runoff, is another dimension.
Yes.
And that, I mean, with Poe and his handling of the Gothic and horror, there is something that may or may not be out there. We don't know. It's very ambiguous, and that's one of the things I absolutely love about the work of Poe.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's any insinuation that there is another reality beyond our own, or another level or dimension. But with Lovecraft, there is this sense of another level of existence out there, or if you will, another dimension. I mean, the horror of the Cthulhu. I mean, that's where that comes into play. And you have something very similar going on in Runoff. In fact,
right.
You mentioned the not only individuals coming together and being stuck in this small town because of supernatural means, but also various genres, so to speak, kind of stuck into this town as well. And that's one of the things I noticed. You do bring in a variety of different genres. I mean, this starts off somewhat realistic horror, but then it becomes a little more supernatural. You mentioned, the existential crisis. There's quite a bit of philosophical speculation going on there, as well as scientific. And this is where the dimensions come into play, because there are a couple of places in the book where characters. Now, there's one in particular. It's Joseph
Tyra.
Tyra. Okay,
Joseph
I guess
Tyra.
I was pronouncing his name Tara, but Tyra. But he is the scientist who, about maybe halfway through, explains, or maybe not quite halfway through the book, explains what's going on with this other dimension. Right.
He's a paraphysicist is his title. Yeah. Right. And that's, this is something that I've always been, I grew up loving the supernatural and the occult, and would be the kind of kid that I remember looking up definitions. I love reading definitions of monsters in the dictionary, like what's a ghoul and what's a goblin, and look into Webster's dictionary, the actual description. And so there's something about it that I've kind of always loved, the kind of the scientific or the academic end of the supernatural, as false as it may be. However, there's amazing things, like there's a spiritualist movement that happened in the early 1900s. I think I talk about a little bit in the book, but where you actually have physicists. Actually, I don't talk about this in the book, but you had physicists stand up for spiritualists in the early 1900s as they began to understand more about the nature of reality as far as multi-dimensions. And this actually came from physicists in their early 1900s saying, wait a second, actually what these spiritualists are saying have a lot in common with what we would imagine as being interactions with the fourth dimension. And you have great books like Flatland that talk about this world of two-dimensional characters and what happens when a third dimension happens. And there's no reason not to believe why we're not intersecting somehow with another dimension in a way that is rubbing and showing markers in a way that we don't fully understand. And then in that way, I thought of taking it one step further and saying, well, what if beyond that certain more interactions happen than you think, other than just bubbles of dimensions hitting each other? I mean, what if one dimension is actually feeding off another? What if that is, in effect, a food chain we hadn't even thought about? And so there's an element of science and naturalism that I wanted to bring into this supernatural. A really big part to me about Runoff that I felt growing up in the woods in Washington State is kind of being at the edge of a closing frontier, but kind of also being at the edge of something both very civilized yet very wild. Looking back, growing up there, there's just a very an interesting element of the wild and the civilized really kind of meeting in those parts up in the woods in the Cascade Mountains. And you get actually things like, Twin Peaks out of that, which growing up in Washington State at the time felt like one of the most honest pieces of TV I'd ever seen. It really resonated with me. I was in junior high, and after growing up with all these shows that took place in California, the weirdness of growing up in Enumclaw and the strange presence, the kind of haunting presence of the atmosphere that surrounded the town in that show actually felt like home to me. It was really weird. And obviously Lynch is a really big influence of mine as well.
Well, some of that weirdness of the region, you definitely, as you were explaining it, you definitely worked into this tale. And I think part of that weirdness comes out in the characters, again, a very Lynchian thing. And one of the ones that really stands out is the mayor. And do you pronounce his name Balduino or Balduino?
Balduino. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he is, okay, explain him to our listeners.
So Balduino comes from a long line of mayors. His father was a mayor. Kind of since the founding of this town as a logging town in like what was Native American land, his family, the Balduinos, have always been the head politicians, the mayors within this town, and he just could really give two shits about making the town any different than it is already. He loves that town. I think there's a line in the book where he kind of jokes like, well, why would anyone want to leave here anyway? Like, he just sees no need to progress the town past. He likes to keep it small. However, he's crazy like a fox. Like, he's a very canny and savvy political entity where, he can retain power and has a good working relationship back channel with the Snoqualmish tribe, the native tribe. All the while, like, pretty much blatantly spending his days fishing, saying, strange offhand remarks to people, and pretty much looking at like he's halfway checked out. And I should say, he is old as dirt as well, but he plays all of this to hide a very like savvy political mind, I guess. And his challenger, Gil Wallen, is wanting to modernize the town and move it into, possibly moving into something a little more catering to the people coming up to go skiing in the mountains, which was very much happening when I grew up, with people trying to change Enumclaw to reflect skiers going up to Crystal Mountain. And there was a lot of debate of how to change Enumclaw. And so, so Balduino just is this old guard of like, we're never going to change this town. I'm just going to keep fishing and protecting it, but that's Balduino. I absolutely loved writing him.
In fact,
I should say a few of his sayings actually were sayings of this really, really kind of mad genius teacher I had growing up, like skin breath and horse face. Those were literally taken from an old math teacher of mine that he would say those things. So, yeah.
Well, you mentioned his efforts in really not wanting to progress the town. He just wants to keep things as it is. And his comment fairly early on, when people realize that they can't get out of range, he says, well, why would anyone want to leave? One of his first acts, once we realize that this phenomena has occurred, is he has printed up I think it's a one-page flyer that basically says, well, welcome to range, and these are places you can go for dinner and where you can stay. Enjoy your stay.
and visit our pickle factory.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly. It becomes a tourist flyer. It's like, really, it's like, hey, welcome to Range. Lucky you, you're stuck here. And then, later in the book, you see kind of the scare tactics that Gil Wallen has when he's running against him about warning people about electing a ghost into office. And so like that's his pamphlet. And so that, I wanted to message, they're two, they're far apart in the book, but that sort of in my mind is the difference between the scare tactics and anyway, of Gil Wallen and the welcoming, everything's fine of Balduino.
Right. Now, you mentioned electing a ghost, and I don't think that this is a spoiler, but Balduino, at one point, you mentioned being as old as dirt. He dies,
yep. Yes.
And let's just say he doesn't die from old age.
Right.
But that's not the last of him, because he comes back as a ghost, because there are ghosts that are present throughout the narrative. Right. And he decides to run again for mayor, this time as a ghost. And it may sound like this is the story going off the deep end, and maybe in some ways it is, but this is where there's humor before this part, but this is where things really get funny, where you have not just the fact that a ghost is going to run for office, but that there is an entirely new and quite large voting bloc that no one even considered before.
Exactly.
Those who have passed.
Right. And are over 18. And I think there's this one where he's talking to a little kid. Of course, we all see these ghosts as like little children in certain movies, and he asked the child when she died, and she was like 1964. It's like, well, you're over 18, of course you can vote, but it's like a ghost of a 4-year-old. But yeah, of course she's over 18. So, but yeah, you're right. This whole voting block goes, and this isn't a spoiler alert. Anyway, it comes to a point where no souls can leave Range either, and there's something about what's going on that is amping up astral energy, which is basically to say, like, if a ghost or a spirit or a soul is like at a certain amplitude of power, there's a building up of power to allow like these spirits to emerge and become stronger, to appear, or even to become poltergeists. The spirits are rising up as astral energy in this area rises up, which is sort of ties back to what you were saying before about the science end of it. And the astral energy actually is not science, but you know what I mean. So there is this weird bounce back between, like, a funny thing like the ghost voting block, but tied back to astral energy is starting to rise off the charts here. So a whole new voting block emerges.
Yeah, now I want to go back to the multidimensional aspect of this book, because there is one figure that we see. Actually, there's more than one. And I don't know how to describe this entity or being, however you want to phrase this, but he's like, he's got a smiley face, yep. Kind of.
People have called him the eraser.
Okay, see,
other people's words, but
I was thinking more as
yeah.
like a domino. He's shaped almost like a domino.
Exactly. Yeah, right. He's shaped. I think a domino is a great way to describe it. Rounded edges. Flat, a little more vertical and wide and skin. Yeah, he's like a domino. Yeah.
And we see him fairly early. I mean, the very first scene of this book, he appears, and I don't know. He strikes me as frightening just because he looks non-threatening.
Right.
And even cuddly,
right.
Because of the face that he has, if you want to call it a face, his appearance.
Right.
And he seems to be floating wherever weird things are happening. And this, I mean, it's maybe an equivalent to a scary clown or a clown, because, there's something about a clown that's supposed to be happy and fun. But I've always, and listeners of this podcast will know that I've almost always found clowns, even the most friendly of them, friendly looking of them, something horrific is lying underneath. Now, you say, it's easy to see that in something like a Pennywise, right? But, that's fair. I'm talking
with
about
sharp teeth and
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about, clowns that look very human and accommodating and happy. To me, the better and more jovial they look,
the scarier it is.
Exactly. And that's what this domino eraser type figure floating around is all about.
Right. And actually, I'm glad you said that, because it is sort of a Rorschach test for the people who see it. There's a scene where it's appearing in the middle of a very strange scene in a pet store, and Joe Madsen, who is kind of the police chief for the Snoqualmie Indians, is with a few other people in a posse kind of trying to hunt it down. And one of the people says, like, whoa, look at that, it's kind of cute. And Joe Madsen says, I think it looks like a tombstone. And so I think, and so it's kind of all in the eye of the beholder, because it gives no, like, as you probably know, like, its eyes don't move. It's always in the same expression. It's consciously actually when I was designing that character, I wanted it to feel like it was pulled out of an anime, like out of something from a Japanese comic. And I wanted it to have that otherworldliness from pulling from a genre that just is so out of left field in this context, but almost like having it be like a floating not action figure like a G.I. Joe, but like, like a cute Japanese stuffed toy. It's not supposed to be plush, but this cute, super cute, almost like Japanese, thing that if you found it floating out in the middle of the Pacific Northwest woods at night, would be so creepy. Would be so much more creepy than a gremlin or like a wolf or something. I don't know. Like that would be like, I would just freak out.
I'm glad you mentioned the anime, because I was just about to say those eyes, it has that kind of manga moe style in the way that it looks. And again, that adds to the creepy factor.
Exactly it. And to your point of like, of course those are super cute, kawaii is just so cute. Like if I put that thing in another context, it'd be so cute. Even kind of like when Siva, the monkey, is hugging it is sort of cute. But like, out of context, like in another context, it just gets creepy. To your point of like the more jovial and happy the clown is in the right context, that is far more scarier than Pennywise. And I actually think it's a thing of when you rub a genre up against another, sometimes they catapult each other to like a much better place. Meaning the knee-jerk reaction would be like, okay, we're going to make a scary clown. So I'm going to take a clown and make it with sharp teeth and blood instead of paint. But like, instead, if you took like the clown that might have been like in Howdy Doody or some other like 50s show and just lifted it like as is and put it in, that to me is just so much more disturbing. And so there are times in Runoff that like a something disturbing is being transmitted through something funny, or something funny is literally being overlaid on something disturbing. And I find like instead of negating each other, it just, they both like propel each other. And I love that with when genres can rub up against each other. And what's great about comics is I think this is an underutilized tool of storytelling where, unlike cinema, I guess you could have like cuts between different styles of cinema. But literally overlaying almost like, it's not going as far as a collage, but having things dipping out within the same narrative through different styles, I think comics can do that really so well. And I'm surprised more people don't use that as a device for storytelling, I guess, in comics specifically.
Now, a while ago, you mentioned the chief of the tribal police, Joe
Madsen. Yeah.
Right. Now, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, as this story progresses, especially when we're in the last, let's say, third, we have what could be called a 3-part protagonist, and that is Joseph Tyra, Joe Madsen, and then Hal, who is an officer of of Range. And those seem to be the three characters that are the most in control, the most level-headed, and at least attempting to make sense and handle everything that comes to them. Whereas everyone else is either whacked out or crazy or drunk in one form or another, or just do not have a very good grasp on the situation.
Right. And I'm glad you pointed that out, because consciously I wanted it to be someone from the Snoqualmie tribe, someone from Range, and an outsider, which those three people are. And that they had to, from not really being all that aligned, they are a team, effectively, by the end, trying to get through this. But, at the beginning, they are all in disconnected tribes, you might say. Mm-hmm. But yeah, exactly.
And, although those three characters seem to be the ones who attempt to be in control throughout at least the last half of the book, you have a very large ensemble cast. In fact, if readers take a look at the cover, and not just the front, but the wraparound of Runoff, then you see a whole range of characters from Range, so to speak.
Yeah, right.
And so that ensemble format, I think, works really well in this story, because it is a rather long narrative. How many pages is this book? It's
almost 450. I think maybe 425 or something. Yeah.
And
it's long.
Yeah, and so there's ample opportunity for certain characters to come into the narrative and then depart in one form or another. Sometimes they pop back for a while. Sometimes we see them for long stretches. Sometimes only part of a scene. And along with this, I wanted to ask you, it has, in terms of its ensemble cast, a feel of Burke Breathitt's Bloom County, and I mention this because there are a variety of occasions in this book where the style of your storytelling reverts to a strip-like format. In other words, these are like the strips that people would see in their daily newspaper, and when you revert to the strip format, your art becomes a little more cartoony, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but it also greatly reminds me of Bloom County.
You were barking up the exact right tree. If you notice, actually, on some of the early moments where it slips into that style, I actually sign my name backwards, just like Burke Breathitt did in the old strips. I don't know if you remember, he used to sign Burke Breathitt backwards, but it's totally a Bloom County. And I should say, Bloom County came to mind when I was first thinking of this book, specifically because I knew I wanted to get it to a point where, again, it's sort of hard not to give certain spoilers, but this probably to readers or people who haven't read this is like a stack of cards of what sounds like an unwieldy amount of strangeness. But I knew I wanted to have animals start talking, and I knew I had to get it to that point. And a point where all these things were stacking on top of each other and all these people had to live together. And it made me think of, and I'm a huge fan of Bloom County, of that, the premise of the boarding house that Burke Breathitt had made in the original Bloom County strip, where he had a boarding house that had, Steve Dallas, who's like a ex-frat boy lawyer, Milo and his father, a lot of children, and then like a bunch of talking animals. And they were all living in this like boarding house. And it was incredible. And I wanted to have that same spirit of it eventually reaching this sort of normalcy that was amazing about Bloom County, that they all just happened to live in this boarding house together, like, in this space together. And it was a penguin would be waiting in line with a doped out cat, waiting for Milo to finish brushing his teeth or something. I loved it, and so I am a huge fan of Burke Breathitt, and the way actually he kind of pushed his own medium of comic books or of comic strips through the 80s and early 90s was. So I when I was in elementary school, I'd save up money to buy the collections of Billy and the Boingers and all that. I loved his stuff then. And so anyway, to go back, sorry, I was going down my own
memory lane. I'm right there with you. The 1980s were all about Bloom County.
And what's so funny is, remember, it ended with Trump buying the strip. Donald Trump they put Donald Trump's brain into Bill the Cat, and Donald Trump bought the Bloom County strip, and that's why it ended, was because Trump bought it to pave way for something. But anyway, it's just funny how that's resurging. But but you were totally right that was a very direct homage to Burke Breathed, who actually is also from the Northwest. I got to meet him when I was in elementary school. He was signing books around the Western Washington area that I grew up in. And so he consciously was on my mind when I was starting to put this book together, because I wanted to take it to where he was doing it, but then subvert it. And it definitely continues to have like levity to it, but there's some of the most, in my mind, dark and disturbing moments that begin to happen within that style of comic book, that 4-panel style. Later in the book, it becomes really dark.
And at first it's quite an abrupt stylistic shift, to the point that I felt reading that maybe I got a little whiplash. It's like, wait a minute, so to speak. It's like, wait a minute, did I miss something? What's going on here? And it's not just in the art style, but the fact that you go from, I guess, what one could call for lack of a better term, a graphic novel means of illustrating the narrative to, 1 or 2 pages of strips that are also very lighthearted and, at least on the surface, kid friendly. It's like, what is this? And even visually, it is lighter. You use less ink.
Right. I used even different inking pens to do those. Exactly. Yeah.
So, but that becomes less problematic as the book, or at least as stark of a difference as the book evolves, because then you get to those darker tones that you mentioned just a second ago.
Yeah, and then as I said before, it became the two, especially at points in the book, they really start scrambling where maybe you only get one panel out of a 4-panel piece, or I knew it would be an abrupt shift, for sure. That's a pretty unpredicted move when you turn the page and suddenly get confronted with that. But I wanted to kind of start building up a toolbox of different genres that would eventually get thrown in the blender together at certain moments that I wanted them all to sort of mix, and I chose them in a way as like different, I don't know, I'm using different analogies, but different ingredients in a recipe for a certain flavor I was trying to go. And I knew I couldn't get it just from one genre. I had to like do a hodgepodge to get exactly what I was kind of going for with Runoff. Mm-hmm. And so it was weird. I felt like I have to like pick from film noir. I have to pick from old AC comic style, like Tales from the Crypt, 50s horror comics, and Bloom County, mm-hmm. and just kind of, and even a little bit of superhero as the Society of M comes in and become pseudo vigilantes of the town. There is definitely, I wanted to bring in a little bit of the superhero into that element too.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of the Society of M within the context of superheroes, but you're right. There is that vigilante side of them. And we should mention to our listeners, the uninitiated at least, that the Society of M is made up of these almost like classic, I guess you could say, monsters.
The Universal monsters, from Universal Studios, right? All except Frankenstein, but there is a reason I didn't. It's the Mummy, Dracula,
Actaton is, or how do you pronounce that
Actaton,
name?
Yeah.
Actaton is the mummy. Yeah. Vlad is
Vlad Basarab. Yep.
Yeah. And then there's Mr. Pickles.
Mr. Pickles, the zombie.
Zombie. Why? Okay, so Vlad. Okay, I can understand that name. Mr. Pickles. I mean, it's funny.
It was almost a spur of the moment thing where when they appeared, and I didn't want it to be, but I didn't want it to come across as a reference to the pickle factory that was in town. But it was because I realized, like, oh, I mentioned pickles before in the book, but really it's like, a pickled human, like he's it's just Mr. Pickles. It was just, I thought it'd be funny to have, like, Vlad Bessarab or I don't know if I'm even pronouncing that right. It's sort of the old, they believe that's kind of the original Vlad the Impaler, and Akhenaton, there's, was a true pharaoh and so on. But then just Mr. Pickles along with the three of them was just a sort of curveball I'd like to consider and then throw and run off. Like, okay. Oh, and Mr. Pickles. Yeah, that'll be them. And then wrapping up the Society of M is Mr. Teeth, aka Legend, who's technically a moon demon, but is close to a werewolf, but not in this sort of Lon Chaney Jr. And I hope I didn't, like, I was purposely not trying to make, like, Dracula like Bela Lugosi or the Wolfman like Lon Chaney Jr. I wanted different things, like even like the Mummy, giving the Mummy the properties to kind of have his body expand beyond, like when he unwraps that his body kind of grows. Right. Was just wanting to kind of have new twists on these monsters or new takes on them. And, at the heart of it, the idea is, that they want to do good, that they're actually trying to find a way to remove themselves from society. They're trying to find ways to no longer prey on humans as food. And they believe that by entering into this town and participating in the runoff, they might be able to let humanity be rid of them forever. And so you could say that they are doing this out of doing this for the good of the world, removing these people that have to feed off of humans, and they know that they're these cursed immortal souls. So the Society of M is sort of a redemption to, for these cursed beings. And so they, in the book, like, they like literally save kids from oncoming traffic to catching people in the night, robbing for food and turning them back to the law enforcement. So they became these night vigilantes. I don't play it too much in the book, but there is that feeling like there's kind of a new authority in town beyond the police, and that's right. The Society of M. Yeah. Which comes to a head, of course, with the bear, which again is one of my favorite scenes, admittedly, is when the bear decides to eat meat again. Yeah. And has a face down with the police and the Society of M.
Now, we mentioned that this is about 450 pages long. So this is a big, chunky project. How long ago did you begin Runoff?
In 1999, actually. So I did a book called Race Car when I was a senior at Occidental College in Los Angeles. And I finished that year, my final year at Oxy, and started writing Runoff right after I finished that. It was the first time in a while I'd gotten really in the mode of making comics again. And so I started purely writing Runoff in 99, and I finished the arc. I knew how it was going to be finished. I knew the ending of Runoff. I knew the beginning of Runoff and the ending of Runoff, and I began to fill in the middle and cast the people I wanted to do. But I actually didn't really start drawing the first page of Runoff until probably the year 2000, and then it was 7 years till I finished it. So I finished it in 2007.
Okay, and this originally had life as was it a 4-part series, 4-issue series?
It originally had life as a self-published 32 pages. I self-published them from like between 2000 and 2002. And they were 32 pages each. And I believe there are 5 of those issues that I published. And I think I published issue 5 and went to the Alternative Press Expo in San Francisco. And before I went, I posted on my website at the time, like, I'm looking now to stop self-publishing if there's any publishers interested. And at that convention, Odd God Press, who's based in Virginia, approached me and said they'd be interested in finishing out Runoff as a series. So they took the books that I published previously on my own and republished them as a individual, like 150-page perfect bound book that we just called Runoff Chapter 1. And then we decided just to do the remaining books in 2 more chapters. So in 2005, I think Runoff Chapter 2 came out, which was the next like 150-page installment. And then Runoff Chapter 3 came out in 2007, which was about a 200-page installment or so. Or maybe about 150 other pages. It adds up to about 450. But that's how it originally was published. Started self-publishing, then moved into the indie publishing for the 3 chapters, and then now is collected as this individual volume.
Okay. Now, both the self-publishing and with Odd God, were these in physical hard copies or digital or both?
Yeah, physical hard copies. I've never released them digitally. But yeah, both physical copies.
Okay, so now tell me, how did you get from Odd God to One Piece books?
So Odd God published Chapter 3 in 2007, and those books are gone. I forget what the print run was, but from my understanding, One Piece, which is a Japanese publisher, they consciously wanted to start publishing in American comic book creators for the American market, and wanted to reach out to. They're interested in comic book creators that kind of had a degree of a cult following, I guess, for lack of a better word. And they reached out to me and just said, yeah, has anyone thought about just doing Runoff as one book? Like, that always was the intention, is that it's one. There's no reason to split it up other than that was the way I sequentially released it as much as I could in the units that I found right. But it always was intended as a single story. And myself, and I reached out to Odd God, and they said that they weren't intending to and would be willing to sell the rights to One Piece. So in a way, this is I'm extremely excited, because this is the form that I've always imagined it taking, and wasn't sure if I'd ever get to like hold the entire story with one volume. And it's really exciting to me to have it be a singular novel now.
Now, you mentioned the cult following. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, what kind of following before you got to One Piece did Runoff have?
Oh man, it's amazing. So a lot of it, I have to give a lot of credit to Guillermo del Toro, who was a fan really early on. There's a guy named Nick Nunziata who runs a website called chud.com, Cinematic Happenings Under Development, and he lives in Atlanta. And he's just a fan of comic books, and I guess he lent Guillermo Runoff Chapter 1 like back in 2003. And kudos that Guillermo del Toro reads something that obscure, and he read it and just was crazy for it. And in 2005, they contacted me. This is before Pan's Labyrinth came out, actually. They contacted me out of interest of making something out of the property. But this is before the book was even finished. And so I had a call, and they were really curious what the finish of the story was. And so I told them basically how it ends. They were completely down with it. To make a long story short, he was propelled into fame through Pan's Labyrinth, and of course then was offered The Hobbit. And at that time, Guillermo's well known for kind of lending his name to lots of projects. So I knew I was one of many different people he was chatting with. So I don't want to make it sound like we were like casting for this thing or anything, but we were talking. But he had to put the stop to almost everything when he thought he was going to be doing The Hobbit. But with that, he put me in touch with all these other people that he was friends with, like Lloyd Levin, who produced The Watchmen, the movie The Watchmen, and then through him, interestingly enough, anyway, to make a long story short, it just had run through this underground vein with a lot of sort of some power hitters, saying very publicly, like, oh, there's this great book, Runoff, that's totally crazy and underground. You should check it out. And they name dropped it a few times, and that grew into coverage. And Playboy did a write up on it, and Giant Robot magazine. So it just got this exposure that I know would not have happened.
So hold on, Playboy,
not the website, I should say, of Playboy interviewed me and did a write up of Runoff. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, whether it's hard copy or the web, it doesn't matter. I mean, Playboy, that's a major media outlet.
Yeah, and totally agreed. And so that would be one of those things where I'm like, wow, okay. And that was like in 2007 or 8 that was the release of Chapter 3. And so it allowed these kind of heavy hitters allowed this to sweep up a bit, this very underground book. And so even to this day, there are people who ask sometimes, like, are you going to do a sequel, or, that they love the property, but I remind them if they really read the ending or not. I'm like, there is no sequel. That's the end. That is the end. But it's great how beloved the book is, and continues to get a real life to it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Del Toro, and he, I believe, has one of the endorsement blurbs on the back of the book, which is really, really, really good that you got that. He is, you mentioned Pan's Labyrinth, but he is no stranger when it comes to creating some kind of film or even television property based on comics. There's, the Hellboy,
right.
The Strain.
Yep.
And Blade. So, I mean, this guy has an interest in comics and turning them into some kind of cinematic production.
Yeah. Any
possibility, any conversation about an adaptation of Runoff?
Not with Guillermo. But he continues to be a supporter. I don't think he's, a few times we remain in touch with each other, and there are times where I'm like, the property's open again. But Lloyd Levin, there was Lloyd Levin and a group of us, we pitched and sold the rights to Fox a few years ago, and then when my option was back up for the rights, I got them back. And really what this turns into is a bunch of stories of name dropping that has no beneficial end of it. But I have to tell you this one amazing story of like a cultural moment in time is in 2008, before we sold it to Fox. Andrew Cosby, who wrote Eureka for the Sci-Fi Network, wrote a pilot for Runoff, and Lloyd Levin. Yeah. And Lloyd Levin and I went, of all places, to Frank Darabont's home studio, basically, in Los Feliz in Los Angeles. And so Frank Darabont, the director of Shawshank Redemption, The Mist, etc. We were talking, and he's like, "Great, I've been wanting to do TV. You know what? I will do this if what I'm putting together right now doesn't get greenlit." And we were like, "Oh, well, what are you working on right now?" And Frank Darabont said, "Oh, it's called The Walking Dead." And we were like, we walked out of the meeting, and I knew the comic. I'm like, of course that's going to get greenlit. Oh my God. And so there was this moment in time I can think back on my life of just sitting there. I remember Frank was like sitting cross-legged on his desk, smoking like a cigarillo, and being like, "Yeah, if this doesn't get greenlit, this Walking Dead, I'll do Runoff." So there.
So saying you're announcing on the Comics Alternative that there has, at least as of yet, been no adaptation of Runoff, largely due to Walking Dead.
Yes. Right. And so it's a story that allows me to drop a lot of names but show really no output in the end. But it's been amazing to see like the people who have gotten really excited about this, because I think of it as such a weird and edgy thing. But like it's been neat to see people get excited about this product. But I don't know. I've pulled back. I'm not shopping it around as much. I have some ideas about it, but I came to, like I said, I got in touch with Guillermo about this in 2005, And it was just last year that I just decided not to go that option anymore, because I kind of felt like, Runoff was always intended just to be a comic, and I felt like I was chasing something that wasn't the original intention anyway, and I wanted to kind of take a break for a while, because I kept feeling like Charlie Brown having the football pulled, and I'm like, wow, but this isn't really what it's all about in the end. And so I'm taking a break from trying to move that downfield anywhere. Yeah. And in a weird way, like, that was exactly, I think part of that was because One Piece, approached me, and I just was like, let's just celebrate this thing as a comic again, and stop trying so hard to find it life elsewhere.
Now, you mentioned a little while ago that you have had people ask you about a sequel to Runoff, which, without giving the ending away, you're right. There really is not much wiggle room in terms of a sequel. Right. But what about other comics? Do you have any other projects that you're working on right now?
Yeah, I do, and I'm really excited about what I'm working on. I'm over 200 pages into my next book that I will definitely actually complete in this year, 2016. I don't know if the book will be out this year, but it's probably going to be a little over 300 pages long, and it's called Eric. It'll be my first real piece since Runoff, which is a long time, but I'm really excited about this book.
Well, what can you tell us about Eric?
In the true kind of Hollywood mashup stuff, Eric basically is the Big Lebowski meets Jacob's Ladder, is the way I could describe it. Okay. And it's, while with a very, very, very surreal Western thrown in to it. But all that said, it's basically with Runoff was about a ensemble. This is an ensemble cast, a story told through a village. This is a story told through a clear singular protagonist with a clear singular point of view, and both the protagonist and the reader begins to question the reality of the story and the validity of a lot of things as the story progresses. It's sort of, if Runoff was cosmic horror, this is sort of a psychological horror that slowly impends. You descend into someone's point of view and their take on things with them, I guess, as a reader, which is something I really wanted to play with after Runoff was this idea of a really, really strong singular point of view around a narrative. Yeah. And it's about the basic gist of it, going past my initial pitch, my initial line of Big Lebowski meets Jacob's Ladder, is it's about it came from watching this infomercial, back in 2008. I watched this infomercial of 60s great, one of those CD compilations of remember these great hits from the 60s, the time of change and hope and all this stuff. And a lot of, and I was noticing, I knew a lot of the songs, but the artists I'd never heard of. It wasn't like the Bob Dylan, the Beatles. It was just these random, wow, I know that song, but I had no idea who that's the person who sang it. Mm-hmm. So I thought, what are those people like right now? That's just hordes of people that were part of this really optimistic, and I lived in LA for a long time, and I started kind of getting into this idea of sort of the C-list in that scene, but also LA in the 60s, unlike the Bay Area, had this really dark undertone, really dark, that was obsessed with the occult, and out of that rose Manson, and the Doors, and it just was a really dark undertone. And so this is about a story about one of those B-list 60s songwriters that is realizing now in current time that he's just left to this life of obscurity, and his reality starts to shatter, and it gets very, very, very weird. Now,
on your website, you have a preview of Eric.
Yeah, I do. So I published the first 80 pages for people to read, And so the first 80 pages are available for people to basically get the first taste of
and
what
hard
this
copy,
book
right? They can order a hard copy.
Yeah, right. I'm a weird stickler. I write books with a big emphasis on spreads. So even singular pages, I think of them as in relation to the page next to them. So I almost feel like I would feel like I could never really show my books I don't think my books lend themselves, in my mind, as an optimal reading experience in digital. So I always press for the physical. So I never really released my books digital, except for when I released my first book, Race Car, as digital, because I wanted to release it for free as its 15th anniversary. And even then, if people download that PDF, I only allowed it to be viewed as spreads.
Okay. Now, so you have the first 80 pages of Eric that's out. Do you not have any plans to put out other installments, or now the only thing we have is the first 80-page preview, and then the next time we'll see Eric will be after completion?
Yeah, you'll get like a 400-page ka-chunk. And actually, this is kind of I consciously did this because even the parts of that first 80 pages might change. I wanted to finish the book in its entirety and actually be able to reread it a few times and then tweak, take out scenes, reduce scenes in ways that I was never able to do with Runoff because I was always I released it in a sequential way. And so I want to just kind of give myself the opportunity to sit back and kind of reread it and, rewrite a few scenes. I never gave myself that liberty before, and I want to at least try it. But I felt good enough about releasing the first 80 pages. But even those may get tweaked a bit as the final thing gets pulled together.
Now, do you have a publisher for Eric? Is it going to be One Piece Books?
I don't know. So One Piece is definitely interested. They've let me know that, but I haven't given this to any publishers as of yet. I don't know yet who's going to publish it, but I definitely would consider One Piece as one of the publishers. I'll say, done. Do you want to give it a look? And part of that is because I'm kind of a control freak where I want to have the piece finished the way I want it to be finished. And then kind of raise my hand and say done, to see if anyone would like to publish it. I'm just not one that really wants to share things too early with the publisher and be swayed by anything that they would want to see one way or the other before it's finished or printed. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that you went to school in design, and I saw where you have worked with a variety of writers in terms of the design of their books. And one of those creators, Jonathan Safran Foer?
Yeah. I did Eating Animals with him.
Huh.
The book. Yeah.
Yeah, that was that book, the kind of like the memoir, or at least an essay on going vegetarian.
Yeah. Yep, that's right. And I would go up and eat like a ham sandwich in the middle of it. Yeah. Just he knew one thing to his credit. He never asked me if I assigned to these beliefs or not. It was nice. He got in touch with me and said he wanted to work with me on this book. And he had a very different vision of the book at the beginning. It was, amazingly enough, it was originally, when he first approached me, he imagined it oscillating between being a comic book and being prose. And so,
really?
Yeah.
Huh.
And so there's whole Bristol boards of pages of Eating Animals done that we were collaborating on and trying to think of the structure of the book to switch back and forth between a comic book and then we understandably dialed it back. Like it was kind of like doing an art piece with someone. Well, I guess it was an art piece. I mean, but he realized, I think, right, that this being his first piece of fiction, his first piece of nonfiction, that he wanted to, he didn't want to have the style outweigh the substance. And so in the end, because I'm a graphic designer by training as well, we decided to take the structure of the book and start to play with that. And even that we dialed down until what started out as this radical idea and got less and less radical, but kind of smarter. So in the end, we took the chapter headings and basically turned them into infographics. So, like for one example, I designed the book with him, which was pretty traditional, but so I knew the book size and realized that the size, like the rectangle of the size that like an adult chicken lives in through its life in a factory farm could fit within the book block. So one of the chapter headings, for example, is a spread with a black rectangle with the title in it, and then a little asterisk, and then underneath it says like, this, the space inside the rectangle on this spread is the size that an adult chicken lives its life in the factory farm, and then one was the title, I think it's called Influence and Speechlessness, and it just kept repeating that influence, like with no spaces in between for one on page after page after page after page after page, until at the very end, it ends with another asterisk and says like, the typical American eats like, I forget, it's like 20,000 animals in their life, one for each letter in the past 8 pages or something like that. So it would in the end, it was really graphic design that we ended up doing together, but it was crazy. At first it was going to be a comic book / prose book. And once again, the kind of amazingness of the Friends of Runoff, Jonathan got in touch with me because he read Runoff and was interested in. Yeah, and he was like, I want to work with this guy. So he called me. I mean, which is just crazy to me. I don't live a lavish and wealthy lifestyle. I don't know what it is what fairy gives the books to these people, but yeah.
Got Safran Foer, Del Toro, man, who knows? Maybe President Obama's a fan of Runoff, for all we know.
Yeah. We'll see. I'll take that. It'd be a little more disturbed if W called, but I guess I would talk to him about it. Oh, man. Oh, you're the president that likes it? Oh, well. Yeah. But again, it's one of those things where I am really appreciative of it. And I know it's such, I cringe at the amount of name dropping that I know that it is, but at the same time, that's what really, actually, I feel really excited that something that I thought was just kind of a radical take on how to make a comic book and a comic book story and kind of started a self-publishing was able to kind of generate its own momentum. And I just think that I just hope that sort of experimental get out and just do it. Don't overthink it. Just start making it. Spirit. This is a time when that really worked out.
Yeah. Well, Tom, before we go, let's tell our listeners where they can go to find out more about you. Your website is robotsandmonkeys.com, and that's one word, robots and monkeys.
That's right. And from there, you can, at Robots and Monkeys, you can pre-order the preview of Eric, download for free the first comic book I ever did, or graphic novel, called Race Car, in PDF form. And you can order through that site, via Amazon, the collection of Runoff. And of course, you could just go right to Amazon and find Runoff there as well.
Wow. Well, Tom, I want to thank you for taking the time and being on the Comics Alternative. It's been a lot of fun talking with you about Runoff, your new work, Eric, and the big names that you have connected to you.
Thank you. I really, really hope we can talk again. I'll be sure to try to find a way to get Eric in your hands when it's released, and I really hope we can do this again.
Oh, me too. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you.
So, there you have it, my conversation with Tom Manning. I had a great time talking with Tom about Runoff and also his current book that he's working on, Eric. And as we mentioned in the interview, if you want to check out what he's doing with Eric, you can find a preview of it on his website, and that is robotsandmonkeys.com. You'll definitely have to check that out. And while you're checking out things, you should check out our sponsors for this episode, and that is Just Coffee Co-op. Go to their website, justcoffee.com. co-op. And upon checkout, make sure you use the coupon code COMICS. That'll give you 10% off of your order, and remember, shipping is free. By getting your coffee there and using the COMICS coupon code, you'll be helping out the Comics Alternative. And you can continue helping out the Comics Alternative by getting your comics at Discount Comic Book Service. Their website is dcbservice.com. You'll find a lot of great specials for the month of February. And after you get your comics there, be sure to send them an email and do tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you. And if you'd like to get your stuff from Amazon.com, please do so through our associate link. Go to comicsalternative.com/Amazon, and there you'll see a banner. Click on that, and everything you get from that visit at Amazon will help the Comics Alternative. We get a few cents for everything you get there through the referral. Take a little bit from Jeff Bezos and give to the Comics Alternative. In fact, if you look for Tom Manning's book, Runoff, you'll see that you can get it at 23% off of the cover price. And after you do patronize our sponsors and associates, get in touch with us and let us know what you think about our interview episodes. If you go to the website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave a voice message through SpeakPipe. It's very simple and easy to use. Or you can call us over the telephone. The phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427. You can also email us. We're two guys at comicsalternative.com, or you can email me directly. I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com. You can also find us on a variety of social media platforms, such as Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes, and when you do, please be sure to leave us a rating and review. We appreciate that. You can also find us on Stitcher, as well as TuneIn, and as always, you can find every single one of our episodes, as well as the reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, and that's at comicsalternative.com. I want to thank you for checking out this interview show. We'll be back with more episodes in the very near future. Until then, take care.